Server and application virtualization platforms. Aside from virtual desktop infrastructure, I think it's good to look at the application virtualization. I wouldn't at this time consider it a primary platform. Most of them will be built on the virtualization platforms, but most of the application virtualization platforms out there today are not robust in the same way that virtualization platforms are. They're not comprehensive enough to run any app anywhere, with a few exceptions. So I would consider them, but I wouldn't consider them a primary platform choice. In the same way that I would have said 5 years ago, looking at virtualization as your only platform choice probably isn't a viable option yet because it isn't quite mature enough yet. And I'd say the same thing about cloud for things like internal, like core ERP. If you were to not outsource the ERP, but if you were to take your own ERP, I wouldn't go putting that out on Amazon yet. But a lot of the controls and things that you need just aren't in place today, especially if you have compliance issues. The hypervisors, or just the virtualization platforms, I mean, you have a lot of different vendors. VMware, we're talking a little bit about the differences with Hyper-V and the VMware. Amazon and a lot of the others run open source Zen. There's KVM. There's a lot of different vendors out there. There's a lot of different styles. There's different types of pseudo virtualization. I wouldn't follow a path that anybody says what the right fit for your business is. It's really going to depend on what you're doing and what your goals are and what your financial model behind it is. Are you all about uptime? Is it all about your customer service? Do you have the right skills in your IT department to manage the technologies? Oftentimes, I don't know if any of you experienced it, but running open source software that's free isn't exactly so free. And that's why Microsoft Software was talking about, if you look at the different vendors, I'd be really wary of the vendor lock-in, especially with any of the paid vendors. There's a tendency to say they're open platforms, but I've also seen that once you're in there, migrating off of them for licensing reasons and otherwise can be extremely expensive, and especially when you make investments in architecture that are geared directly towards those platforms. So if you look at your typical technology refresh cycle of, say, 3 to 5 years, I know for many of you that's probably extended significantly beyond that over the last 2 years, and now might be the time that it's more critical than ever to make some upgrades. I think what you're going to see over the next 5 to 10 years with the virtualization platforms, you will be changing out servers and things like that because it will make sense for replacement and financial and power and cooling type reasons that it'll pay for itself. You get cheaper, better, faster servers. But I think that tech refresh cycle is going to be fundamentally extended, and you're really going to push towards a refresh cycle that's really 10 to 15 years. The same thing you've seen in traditional telecom and a lot of other markets. As IT is maturing, we're sort of in that area where, or that time frame where IT doesn't have to change everything every couple of years. It doesn't have to be the next fad. And I think over the last couple of years, that's really hit home for a lot of people that the same applications they've had for a few years, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Or in this case, if it ain't broke, fix it now, but don't keep fixing it after that. You get to a good place if you plan it right. I'd really look at the people, and again, I've done a lot of assessments for virtualization, both after the fact, before the fact, during the fact, and it comes down to the people, process, and technology. Are the people ready? Do you have the headcount? Do you have the skill sets? Do you have the process and governance in place? Do you have the frameworks? A lot of this sounds like ITIL or ITSM, if any of you are familiar with that. I'm certified in that, and I talk a lot about that because these not because any one particular structure matters, but because it's good to have a structure. So I talk about seeing the doctor, the prescriptive part. Well, those things aren't prescriptive, but at least they give you a good framework under which to operate. And then the technology, of course, doing that evaluation based on your business needs. Again, I can't tell you how many, for instance, I had a customer who was good friends, not a large customer, but good friends with the VMware rep, and they ended up getting it, but they didn't realize that you started getting it, but then you had to pay for all the management tools, and they had it accounted for what vCenter and all those other tools would end up costing them, and almost pushed them to change. They ended up coming to terms and being able to purchase that platform, but again, they didn't really know what they're getting into because they didn't do that upfront planning. How many of you use traditional SAN fiber channel type environments? Almost everybody, okay. And the rest of you that didn't raise your hands, how many of you is that network-based, be it iSCSI or NFS or any of those types of? Okay, so there's some tiering and some spread on that. It's typically seen as an anchor. That's why every time I see a data center move, I usually see IBM or Hitachi or EMC out there, because the hardest thing to move is the storage. And to virtualize or not, I don't think is a question. It's just a matter of when. The storage virtualization technology has been out there in hardware since 2004, 2005. I don't know how many of you have seen those platforms, but right now in the SAN switches, if you are even still in the SAN type of environment, you can do inherent virtualization there, which also lets you redirect your I/O across data centers, do all these great things. Basically the same things that you could do with server virtualization, that's all in storage now. So how does that change things? Well, I think that sort of unanchors you from your traditional data center, allows you to do that virtual data center. You can spread your data and your storage applications and provide that storage as a service, much in the way you'd buy a storage service in the cloud. You can provide that across your data centers, across your organization. The cost has come down a lot. The functionality has gone up. I know we used to have tons of these huge disk arrays full of very, by today's standards, small disks. And now on a shelf like this, you can have quite a few terabytes of storage, and it's also much faster. I also highly recommend looking at tiered storage, including the tier 0 flash type storage. Probably a lot of you have the tier type storage where you have SAN for main apps, then maybe iSCSI or NFS or different things for slower type applications, and even slower backup to disk, and then maybe you have some real high performance disk for databases, maybe some localized disk for those things. But what about mezzanine and flash type storage, and architecting those things so they're going to be a good fit for the virtualized environment, because it is distinctly different in how you're going to configure your servers and your storage environment if you're provisioning it for virtualization, especially if you're provisioning it for virtualized storage, which gives you a lot of great benefits in being able to move machines around across data centers. So if you look at BCD, business continuity and disaster recovery, that sort of being an inherent functionality built into some of the virtualization platforms now, that almost eliminates a whole other set of issues that you might have and gives you integrated BCDR. And I don't know how much of you have spent a great deal of money on doing those things, but it's an awful lot easier now to do that. So it's worth some planning investment up front. And I've seen that as sort of an afterthought. I'd highly encourage you not to put that one in the back burner. If you're looking at some of the new types of storage and connectivity, and I'll try to be cognizant of my time here. I know being cranking through this stuff. Certainly the SAN, iSCSI, and NAS is a good option. How many of you are familiar with DRBD? It's sort of a network grade open filer, or HPU bought left-hand NAS. There's some different storage options out there like that make it even cheaper, but also very resilient out on your network platform. And the next big leap, and this has been coming for a long time, is moving all the storage to 10 gig and just moving it to the network. And all the switch vendors are coming out with these non-packet dropping platforms for the network and storage. And I don't know how many of you know, but fiber channel, or I should say gigabit Ethernet, its framing standard is actually based on the original fiber channel. So it's almost the same exact thing. They use very similar ASICs and chips in these platforms. So the convergence has been there. They've been trying to push it for a long time. I think with the advent of massive server virtualization, having one wire makes more sense than ever, and the economies of scale really are there to do that. I wouldn't make any data center network investments without at least making